I am Hercule Poirot. Welcome to my new mystery story.
The December wind that swept across the Yorkshire moors carried with it more than the promise of snow. It brought an ominous chill that seemed to seep through the very stones of Thornfield Manor. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, had arrived that afternoon at the invitation of Lady Vivian Ashworth, a formidable woman of 62 whose passion for rare botanical specimens was matched only by her reputation for hosting the most exclusive gatherings in the county. The manor itself stood like a fortress against the gathering storm, its ancient grey stones weathered by centuries but unbroken. Inside, however, warmth radiated from every carefully tended fireplace, and the great hall blazed with the light of a dozen candelabras. It was December 23rd, 1934, and Lady Ashworth had assembled what she termed her winter circle for a most particular purpose. The drawing room, adorned with holly and ivy, housed a carefully curated collection of individuals, each bound to Lady Ashworth by threads of blood, business, or botanical passion. There was Sir Reginald Pemberton, her nephew and presumed heir, whose nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles betrayed an anxiety that his forced joviality could not quite conceal. His gambling debts were whispered about in London's better clubs, and his dependence upon his aunt's generosity was a poorly kept secret. Beside him sat his wife, the former Miss Cordelia Fairfax, whose beauty had once graced society magazines, but whose recent years had added a hardness to her features that no amount of powder could soften. She moved through the evening with the practiced grace of one accustomed to concealing desperation beneath elegant manners. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, the family physician and Lady Ashworth's long-time confidant, occupied his customary chair near the fire. At 60, he remained distinguished with silver temples and the steady hands of a man who had delivered half the county into the world. Yet tonight, even his professional composure seemed strained. Miss Helena Ashworth, Lady Ashworth's great-niece, provided a striking contrast to the older generation. At 28, she had scandalized society by pursuing a career as an art dealer in London. Her dark hair was fashionably bobbed, and her emerald dress emphasized eyes that held an intelligence both captivating and unsettling. Mr. James Blackwood, the family's business manager, sat somewhat apart from the others, his wire-rimmed spectacles catching the firelight as he consulted his pocket watch with unusual frequency. For 20 years, he had managed the Ashworth finances with meticulous precision, yet tonight his customary calm appeared fractured. Finally, there were Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, distant cousins whose series of unfortunate investments had reduced them to hoping for their wealthy relatives' charity. Mr. Harrison's worried frown had deepened throughout the evening, while his wife's effusive cheerfulness grew more forced with each passing hour. The winter rose. Lady Ashworth herself commanded attention from her position beside the grand piano, where a magnificent arrangement of winter roses, rare Helleborus specimens she had coaxed into December bloom, created a backdrop of ethereal beauty. These pale, nodding flowers, with their green-stained centers, were her latest horticultural triumph. But it was not these botanical marvels that had drawn her guests to Thornfield on this bitter December evening. "My dear friends," Lady Ashworth announced, her voice carrying the authority of one accustomed to being heard, "you have come not merely for my company, delightful though it may be, but because tomorrow evening I shall reveal the fate of the winter rose." The winter rose. Even spoken aloud, the name seemed to crystallize the tension that had been building throughout the evening. Hidden away in Lady Ashworth's private study, locked within a specially commissioned safe, lay the legendary diamond that had been in the Ashworth family for 3 generations. The stone, weighing nearly 40 carats, and possessing a rare blue-white clarity that seemed to capture winter itself, was said to be worth more than most men earned in a lifetime. As the evening progressed, Lady Ashworth regaled her guests with the history of both her botanical specimens and the famous diamond. She spoke of the Russian princess who had allegedly sold the gem to her grandfather, of the careful cultivation required to force winter roses into bloom, of the delicate balance between beauty and danger that characterized both diamonds and flowers. "Nature," she observed, raising her crystal glass of port, "is never more beautiful than when it is most perilous. Consider the winter rose, exquisite, yet every part of it contains compounds that could stop a man's heart. Beauty and death forever entwined." It was then, as if summoned by her words, that death chose to make its entrance. Lady Ashworth had just taken a sip of her evening digestive, a clear amber liquid she favored, when her expression faltered. The crystal glass trembled in her hand, and a peculiar, almost floral scent began to permeate the air. She coughed once, a dry, rasping sound that quickly escalated into something far more alarming. "Vivian?" Dr. Whitfield was immediately at her side, his medical instincts overriding social convention. But Lady Ashworth could not respond. Her face, which moments before had been animated with her customary authority, began to drain of color. Her eyes widened with shock, then fear, as her body stiffened and she collapsed forward, striking the piano with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent room. The crystal glass shattered against the marble hearth, spilling its contents across the Persian rug, while the winter roses, those pale harbingers of beauty and death, seemed to nod in silent acknowledgement of the tragedy that had just unfolded. Dr. Whitfield's examination was swift, but thorough. When he finally looked up at the assembled company, his face was grave. "I'm afraid Lady Ashworth is dead. The symptoms, the scent—" He paused, gathering himself. "I believe she's been poisoned." The storm that had been threatening all evening now unleashed its fury upon Thornfield Manor. The telephone lines, already strained by the weather, finally succumbed, leaving us isolated from the outside world. Inspector Morrison from the village constabulary would not be able to reach us until morning, if then. We were trapped, a circle of suspects in a manor house, with a murderer among us and the legendary winter rose locked away in its safe, as mysterious and dangerous as the crime that had just been committed. As I helped Dr. Whitfield arrange Lady Ashworth's body with the dignity she deserved, I found myself thinking of my friend Hercule Poirot and his often repeated observation that murder is never random, never without purpose. Someone in this room had wanted Lady Ashworth dead and had used her own expertise against her, for who better than a botanist would know the lethal properties of certain plants? The winter roses continued their silent vigil, beautiful and deadly, as the snow began to fall in earnest outside the windows of Thornfield Manor. Tomorrow, if the storm permitted, I would send word to London. Tonight we could only wait and watch and wonder which of us harbored the heart of a killer. The winter rose remained locked away, but its secrets, like those of the woman who had died in its shadow, were about to be revealed by the one man capable of untangling such a web of deception and death, Monsieur Hercule Poirot. The silence that followed Dr. Whitfield's grim pronouncement seemed to crystallize around us, like the frost forming on the windows. Mrs. Harrison was the first to break it, her voice emerging as barely more than a whisper. "Poisoned? But surely that's impossible. We all saw Aunt Vivian pour her own digestif from the decanter." "I'm afraid the symptoms are unmistakable," Dr. Whitfield replied, his professional composure intact despite the circumstances. "The rapid onset, the distinctive almond scent that still lingers in the air, the manner of her collapse. She has been administered cyanide, or something very similar derived from plant compounds." Sir Reginald had gone quite pale, his hands trembling as he adjusted his spectacles. "This is preposterous. There must be some other explanation. Her heart, perhaps, or—" "No," the doctor interrupted firmly. "This was deliberate poisoning, and given Lady Ashworth's expertise with dangerous botanical specimens, I suspect we're dealing with something far more sophisticated than common poison." The implications of our situation began to settle over the room like a suffocating blanket. The telephone lines were down, confirmed by Sir Reginald's frustrated attempts to reach the outside world. The storm had intensified, transforming Thornfield Manor from a comfortable refuge into an isolated prison. We were trapped together until morning at the earliest, and one among us was a murderer. I rang for Barnes, the butler, whose imperturbable demeanor remained unchanged even in the face of tragedy. When I questioned him about the evening's service, his answers were precise and troubling. "Her ladyship always poured her own kümmel after dinner, sir." I arranged the decanters on the sideboard following the meal, then remained by the door until Mrs. Harrison requested coffee be sent to her room. I went to the kitchen and had not returned when this terrible event occurred. "Did anyone else approach the sideboard during your absence?" I pressed. Barnes considered carefully. "I could not say with certainty, sir. The room was left unattended for perhaps 20 minutes. Dr. Whitfield and I examined the scene with meticulous care. The shattered crystal glass lay scattered across the Persian rug, its fragments catching the firelight like malevolent stars. The kümmel decanter bore traces of that distinctive almond scent, though whether from contamination or proximity to the spilled contents, we could not determine. Using a linen napkin, the doctor carefully collected the larger glass fragments into a biscuit tin, sealing our makeshift evidence container with wax from a nearby candle. As we worked, I observed the reactions of our companions. Cordelia Pemberton dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, but her gaze darted nervously from face to face, as if seeing each person in a new and frightening light. Helena Ashworth maintained an almost unnatural composure, though I noticed her hands trembled slightly when she lit a cigarette. Mr. Blackwood had retreated to a corner, his usual meticulous demeanor replaced by rigid stillness. The Harrisons clung to each other, their faces masks of bewildered terror. "We must consider our safety," Dr. Whitfield announced grimly. "If there is indeed a murderer among us, we cannot assume the danger has passed." The suggestion sent a visible shudder through the assembled company. Sir Reginald protested weakly about family loyalty, while his wife's composure finally cracked, her voice rising to near hysteria. "How dare you suggest such a thing? We are Lady Ashworth's family and dearest friends." Yet even as she spoke, I saw the doubt creeping into every face. The comfortable familiarity that had characterized our evening had evaporated, replaced by suspicion and fear. We secured Lady Ashworth's study, where the winter rose remained locked in its safe, the key still hanging from the chain about her neck. Dr. Whitfield removed it with ceremonial care, and we witnessed Barnes lock the study door, the butler retaining the only key. As the company reluctantly retired to their rooms, I remained in the library, composing an urgent telegram to London. The roads might be impassable, but come morning, if any communication were possible, my first message would be to my friend Hercule Poirot. This was precisely the sort of psychological puzzle that demanded his particular genius, a locked circle of suspects, each harboring secrets, and a murder committed with botanical precision. The long case clock struck midnight as I sealed my letter, and somewhere in the depths of the house, a door clicked softly shut. That soft click continued to echo in my mind as I extinguished my candle and made my way through the darkened corridors of Thornfield Manor. The house seemed to breathe around me, its ancient timbers settling under the weight of accumulated snow, yet I could not shake the conviction that human agency, rather than natural causes, had disturbed the midnight quiet. The carpeted hallway absorbed my footsteps as I moved toward the east wing, guided by instinct more than sight. Halfway along the gallery, I detected the faintest scratch of metal upon metal, followed by retreating footsteps descending toward the conservatory corridor. My pulse quickened as I rounded the corner, only to discover Helena Ashworth standing at the far end, a slim figure in a dark dressing gown, the ember of her cigarette painting a dull red star in the gloom. "You startled me," she said, her voice low but steady. I could not sleep. The room felt suffocating after what happened. Quite understandable. I replied, though something in her manner suggested more than simple restlessness. "Did you hear anything just now? Footsteps, perhaps, or a door closing?" She exhaled smoke into the cold air that seeped through an open casement. "I thought I heard voices earlier. Reginald and Mr. Blackwood, it sounded like, though I may have been mistaken about their location." As we walked back toward the main landing together, I noticed a peculiar alteration in the air near the study corridor. The faint, bitter almond scent from the drawing room seemed to have strengthened here, as if carried by some recent disturbance. My examination of the study door revealed minute, fresh scratches around the keyhole, and near the skirting board, a tiny fragment of pale wax gleamed in the candlelight. The implications struck me immediately. Someone had attempted to take an impression of the key, using the classic method of softened wax pressed into the lock mechanism. I carefully collected the evidence with my handkerchief, my mind racing with the ugly suspicion that our murderer was far from finished. Barnes, whom I found fully dressed in the service passage, confirmed that the study key had remained in his possession throughout the night. We immediately sought out Dr. Whitfield, who had not attempted sleep and readily agreed to additional security measures. The chain and key he had removed from Lady Ashworth's neck were sealed in an envelope, signed by all three of us, and locked away in Barnes's private cabinet. Our precautions proved timely, for as we completed these arrangements, a faint clink of glass sounded from the direction of the conservatory. We investigated immediately, Barnes leading with his lantern, and discovered clear evidence of recent activity. The conservatory's warm, humid atmosphere carried the unmistakable scent of crushed vegetation, and on the potting bench stood a mortar and pestle, hastily rinsed but bearing traces of bruised leaves. Dr. Whitfield's examination was swift and grim. "Cherry laurel," he announced, crushing a remaining fragment between his fingers. "Prunus laurocerasus. The leaves contain hydrogen cyanide in considerable concentration. Laurel water can be prepared quite simply with hot water and fresh leaves." The murderer had not only struck once, but had used Lady Ashworth's own conservatory as their laboratory, exploiting her botanical expertise against her. We secured the conservatory immediately, though I suspected the damage was already done. Dawn brought little relief. Only a grey, reluctant light filtered through frost-covered windows. The storm had passed, leaving Thornfield buried under 3 feet of pristine snow that rendered the roads impassable. At breakfast, the assembled company presented a tableau of barely concealed suspicion and fear. Sir Reginald's nervous habits had intensified, his spectacles requiring constant adjustment. Cordelia maintained her composure through sheer will, while the Harrisons clung to each other like shipwreck survivors. Dr. Whitfield appeared haggard, admitting to a sleepless night spent analyzing the murder method. "This was not crude poisoning, Hastings," he confided quietly. "Someone with considerable knowledge planned this carefully, using the victim's own expertise against her." Young Tom Fletcher from the stables managed to reach the village on horseback by mid-morning, carrying urgent messages to both Inspector Morrison and the telegraph office. My wire to London was brief but desperate. Murder by botanical poison at Thornfield Manor. Circle of suspects isolated by storm. Require immediate assistance. Hastings. As we waited for help that might not arrive for hours or even days, I found myself studying each face around the breakfast table with new eyes. One of these people had committed murder with scientific precision, and I feared they were not yet finished with their deadly work. The morning brought little comfort. Only the grey light of a winter day filtered through frost-covered windows that seemed to seal us further from the outside world. At breakfast, the assembled company presented a steady and barely concealed anxiety, each face bearing the particular strain that comes from knowing a murderer sits among familiar companions. Dr. Whitfield and I had agreed that methodical inquiry was our only recourse until proper authorities could reach us. We began with Mr. Blackwood, whose rigid composure had developed hairline cracks overnight. In the library, with the door deliberately left ajar, He sat at the edge of a wing chair, his fingers pressed together in a steeple that trembled, slightly despite his efforts at control. Lady Ashworth had grown increasingly secretive about her intentions, he admitted, his voice carefully measured. She requested that I prepare certain documents regarding the winter rose, but would not specify their nature. She mentioned only that Christmas Eve would bring clarity to all concerned parties. His account of the previous evening proved particularly illuminating. The late conversation with Sir Reginald had indeed been heated, with the nephew pressing desperately for immediate financial relief. "I refuse to authorize any advance against his inheritance," Blackwood stated firmly. Such decisions required Lady Ashworth's explicit instruction. When I inquired about his movements after dinner, a slight pause weakened his assurance. I took a turn about the gallery for air. The drawing room had become rather close. His cuffs, I noticed, bore minute pale grains clinging to the fabric. When questioned, he brushed them away with suspicious haste, explaining that he had sealed some investment abstracts that morning using the house sealing wax. Helena Ashworth followed, her composure intact, but somehow brittle, like ice that might crack under pressure. She freely acknowledged her nocturnal wanderings, explaining that grief and shock had made sleep impossible. "I heard voices below during the night," she admitted. "Masculine tones, with an undertone of controlled anger. I thought perhaps Uncle Reginald and Mr. Blackwood were continuing their discussion." Her knowledge of the conservatory plants proved extensive. "Aunt Vivian taught me botanical Latin before I learned proper grammar," she said with a bitter smile. "But the preparation of plant extracts was always her domain. She said such knowledge was dangerous in inexperienced hands." Cordelia Pemberton's interview revealed a woman balanced on the knife's edge of desperation. Her brittle elegance could not quite conceal the fear that animated her every gesture. "Reginald's creditors have grown impatient," she confessed, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "We received threatening letters just last week. Without Lady Ashworth's assistance, we face complete social and financial ruin." The Harrisons painted an equally desperate picture, their series of failed investments having left them entirely dependent on Lady Ashworth's charity. Mr. Harrison's account included a troubling detail. He had observed Mr. Blackwood moving swiftly from the direction of the study toward the morning room, walking with unusual stealth on the balls of his feet. Our most significant discovery came when we examined Lady Ashworth's private correspondence. With Sir Reginald's nervous permission, we searched her escritoire and found a sealed envelope addressed in her distinctive hand. "To be read on the evening of December the 24th, by all assembled." The red wax seal bore the Ashworth crest, but closer examination revealed telltale signs of tampering. The seal had been broken and carefully reseated, and minute fibers along the flap gaped like parted lips. Dr. Whitfield and I exchanged grim glances as I slit the envelope with surgical precision. Inside lay a single sheet of expensive writing paper, completely blank. Either the contents had been removed, or the envelope had been deliberately prepared as a decoy. The implications were unmistakable. Someone had already learned what Lady Ashworth intended to announce and had taken steps to conceal that knowledge. The wax fragment discovered near the study door acquired new and sinister significance. Our murderer had not only killed with botanical precision, but had continued their work throughout the night, attempting to access both the study and now Lady Ashworth's private papers. Barnes appeared with disturbing news that confirmed our worst fears. His own cabinet, which held the sealed envelope containing the study key, showed fresh scratching around the lock. A sliver of card, cut to serve as a makeshift pick, had been found on the floor beside it. Though the attempt had failed, the message was clear. Our murderer remained active and determined. As I prepared a second urgent telegram for London, the weight of our situation pressed down like the snow accumulating outside our windows. We were trapped with someone whose deadly work was far from finished, and time was running against us with each passing hour. The reply to my urgent telegrams came sooner than I dared hope. though not in the form I expected. By early afternoon, the sound of sleigh runners crunching through the snow announced the arrival of Inspector Morrison from the village constabulary, accompanied by two sturdy constables whose red faces testified to the bitter journey through the drifted lanes. Morrison himself proved to be a solid Yorkshire man of middle years, with weathered features and the methodical manner of one accustomed to rural mysteries that often proved more complex than they initially appeared. "Your messages reached us just as the roads became passable," he explained, stamping snow from his boots in the entrance hall. "Most fortunate timing, though I confess the circumstances you describe are more serious than our usual country troubles." His pale eyes surveyed the assembled company with professional interest. "I've taken the liberty of requesting additional assistance from London, given the unusual nature of this crime." Morrison's examination of the scene proved immediately productive. He studied the drawing room with the systematic attention of a man who understood that rural murders often hinged on domestic details overlooked by more sophisticated investigators. The shattered glass fragments, the lingering scent near the hearth, the precise arrangement of decanters on the sideboard. Each element received his careful scrutiny. "Someone with intimate knowledge of the household routine," he observed to Dr. Whitfield. "The poison was introduced directly into Lady Ashworth's glass, not the serving vessel. This suggests familiarity with her habits and access during the crucial moments after dinner." His questioning of the assembled company proved methodical and revealing. Mr. Blackwood, maintaining his rigid composure, repeated his account of the late conversation with Sir Reginald and his solitary walk about the gallery. When Morrison requested to examine his attaché case, Blackwood produced it with apparent confidence. The inspector's discovery of 3 crumpled cherry laurel leaves tucked in the side pocket sent a visible shock through the room. "Those are not mine," Blackwood protested, his professional calm finally cracking. "I have never handled the conservatory plants. I only passed through that area to reach the morning room." Morrison's sharp eyes had also noted the pale grains clinging to Blackwood's shirt cuff. When questioned, the business manager explained that he had sealed investment documents that morning, but the inspector's examination revealed these to be ordinary sealing wax, not the distinctive red wax of the Ashworth family crest. The pale fragments matched exactly those I discovered near the study door. Helena Ashworth's quiet observation from the settee carried particular weight. "Inspector, the envelope in my aunt's escritoire had been tampered with. Mr. Blackwood, as business manager, would have had the greatest interest in learning its contents before the Christmas Eve announcement." The search of Blackwood's small office yielded the most damning evidence yet. Morrison discovered a memorandum in the manager's precise handwriting. "To be presented at the Christmas Eve gathering, dissolution of certain trusts, sale of winter rose to settle accounts, with charitable remainder." The inspector's conclusion was grimly logical. This would spell financial ruin for a man who has built his career managing these very investments. A motive of the clearest kind. Despite Blackwood's protests that the memorandum was prepared at Lady Ashworth's instruction and that the laurel leaves had been planted in his case, Morrison had heard enough. The evidence appeared overwhelming, means, motive, and opportunity aligned with devastating precision. As the manacles clicked around Blackwood's wrists, I felt a mixture of relief and unease that I could not quite define. It was then, as if summoned by some providential timing, that a second sleigh appeared on the drive. Through the frost-etched windows, I observed a small, dapper figure in an immaculate overcoat picking his way carefully across the snow-covered courtyard. My heart leaped with recognition and gratitude. Hercule Poirot had arrived at Thornfield Manor. His entrance commanded immediate attention despite his quiet manner. "Inspector Morrison, I presume. I received the urgent telegrams from my friend Hastings and took the liberty of accompanying your return journey. Most fortunate that the roads became passable when they did." His pale eyes swept the assembled company with characteristic precision. I find myself most distressed to learn of this tragedy involving Lady Ashworth, a woman known to me by reputation for her exceptional botanical expertise. Morrison deferred to Poirot with obvious relief, quickly summarizing the evidence against Blackwood. But as Poirot examined the scene with his magnifying glass, I detected the subtle signs that indicated his famous little grey cells were already at work. His study of the conservatory proved particularly intense, and I watched him discover what our earlier examinations had missed. A single crystallized drop on the potting bench that caught the pale winter light like a malevolent jewel. "Most interesting," he murmured, carefully collecting the evidence. "The laurel water was prepared here with considerable skill, but observe, Hastings, this drop fell during the final concentration phase. Our murderer possessed both botanical knowledge and remarkable composure under pressure." As Blackwood was led away to the village lockup, Poirot's examination of the tampered envelope produced a reaction of intense interest. "The resealing was accomplished with technical skill, but not perfection," he observed, comparing wax samples under his lens. "Someone learned Lady Ashworth's intentions and took steps to prevent their revelation. But knowledge, once gained, cannot be easily concealed." It was Barnes who brought the news that shattered our apparent solution. The study door, which we had seen securely locked an hour before, now stood ajar. The safe bore fresh scratches around its dial, and on the blotter lay a tiny curl of tinfoil, no larger than a fingernail paring. Morrison's certainty wavered visibly as he examined this new evidence. "Someone is still active," Poirot observed quietly, his eyes reflecting a satisfaction that puzzled me. "The arrest of Monsieur Blackwood has not ended this affair, but perhaps it has forced our true murderer into premature action." He turned to Morrison with courteous firmness. "I fear, Inspector, that we have apprehended the wrong person. The real killer remains among us, and they grow increasingly desperate." The false solution had crumbled as quickly as it had formed, leaving us once again trapped with a murderer whose deadly work was far from finished. The revelation that our apparent solution had crumbled sent a palpable chill through the assembled company. Poirot's examination of the tinfoil fragment proved immediately illuminating, his jeweler's loupe revealing minute striations that spoke of careful preparation rather than desperate improvisation. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured, holding the metallic curl to catch the pale winter light. "These are not the random creases of confectionery wrapping, but the deliberate folds of one who understands the mechanics of impression-taking. See how it has been cut from the inner lining of a cigarette packet and shaped to capture the resistance of tumblers within a lock mechanism." Inspector Morrison's weathered features darkened with understanding. Someone with considerable expertise in such matters. "Precisely. And consider the timing, Inspector. Our murderer strikes with botanical precision, allows us to discover convenient evidence against Monsieur Blackwood, then uses his arrest as cover for their true objective." Poirot's pale eyes swept the remaining suspects with renewed intensity. "We are dealing with someone whose planning extends far beyond a single poisoning." The psychological pressure of this revelation began to tell immediately. Sir Reginald's nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles intensified to an almost compulsive frequency, while Cordelia's carefully maintained composure developed visible cracks. The Harrisons clung to each other with increasing desperation, their whispered conferences growing more urgent. Most intriguing was Helena Ashworth's reaction, or rather, her studied lack of one. While the others displayed varying degrees of shock and fear, she maintained an almost clinical detachment that seemed inappropriate given the circumstances. When Poirot began his characteristic method of indirect questioning, her responses proved particularly revealing. "The preparation of concentrated plant toxins," Poirot observed conversationally, "requires more than casual botanical knowledge. One must understand chemistry, distillation, preservation techniques. Not every gardener possesses such expertise." Helena's cigarette trembled almost imperceptibly as she responded. Aunt Vivian always insisted that botany without chemistry was mere flower arranging. She required proper understanding of extraction methods before allowing access to her dangerous specimens. But there exists a considerable difference, mademoiselle, between academic instruction and practical application. The murderer's technique demonstrates professional competence, the kind gained through extensive laboratory experience. Dr. Whitfield, who had been observing this exchange with growing thoughtfulness, leaned forward. Helena, you mentioned once that you worked in London before establishing your art dealership. What exactly was the nature of that employment? For the first time, Helena's composure showed genuine strain. Various positions, research primarily, nothing of particular significance. It was Barnes who provided the crucial detail, summoned by Poirot's gentle inquiry about household routines. The butler's revelation that several items had gone missing from the kitchen stores, glycerin, fine flour, and, most ominously, concentrated ammonia, sent an immediate shock through our small gathering. These compounds, Dr. Whitfield observed grimly, when combined with the laurel water already prepared, could create a dispersal system of considerable toxicity. We're no longer dealing with targeted poisoning, but something far more dangerous. Poirot's reaction was swift and decisive. We must secure all remaining chemicals immediately. Our murderer grows desperate, and desperation makes even the most careful criminal prone to catastrophic errors. As we moved to implement these precautions, I noticed Helena's peculiar familiarity with the chemical terminology Dr. Whitfield employed. Her questions were too precise, her understanding too immediate for someone whose expertise lay supposedly in art history and commerce. The afternoon light was beginning to fade when young Tom Fletcher appeared with another telegram, this one bearing the seal of the Metropolitan Police. Inspector Morrison read it with growing amazement before passing it to Poirot, whose eyebrows rose in satisfaction. "Most illuminating," the detective murmured. "It appears that Miss Helena Ashworth's employment in London was rather more specialized than she has led us to believe. 3 years with Pemberton Chemical Works, specializing in the extraction and concentration of botanical compounds for pharmaceutical purposes. A position she left under somewhat irregular circumstances involving missing laboratory materials." The silence that followed was profound. Through the frost-covered windows, shadows began to gather in the corners of the drawing room, and the winter roses in their crystal vase seemed to nod with malevolent knowledge. Helena's cigarette case snapped shut with a sound like breaking bones. "You're suggesting I murdered my great-aunt for professional reasons. That's absurd." "Not for professional reasons, mademoiselle," Poirot replied gently, "but with professional methods. The question that remains is whether the motive was the winter rose itself, or something far more personal that the diamond sale would facilitate." As if summoned by his words, the sound of splintering wood echoed from the direction of Lady Ashworth's study, followed by the distinctive click of a safe door swinging open. The crash of splintering wood galvanized our small company into immediate action. Inspector Morrison led the charge down the corridor, his heavy boots echoing against the ancient floorboards, while Poirot moved with that peculiar combination of haste and precision that characterized his approach to crucial moments. I followed closely, my heart hammering as we approached Lady Ashworth's violated sanctuary. The study door hung askew on its hinges, the solid oak frame bearing fresh scars where a crowbar had been applied with considerable force. Yet even in my initial shock, I noticed something that would later prove significant. The splintering was too clean, too precise for desperate haste. Someone had known exactly where to strike for maximum effect with minimum effort. Inside, the scene presented a curious mixture of violence and careful arrangement. Papers lay scattered across the Persian carpet, yet closer examination revealed they remained in roughly chronological order. Drawers had been pulled from the mahogany desk, but their contents showed signs of methodical rather than frantic searching. Most tellingly, the wall safe stood open, its steel door revealing the empty velvet-lined interior where the winter rose had rested for decades. Poirot's examination proved immediately illuminating. While Inspector Morrison focused on the obvious signs of forced entry, my friend's magnifying glass sought subtler evidence. He discovered a minute fragment of pale wax pressed into the carpet near the safe, matching the residue we had found earlier near the study door. On the desk blotter lay a thin shaving of what appeared to be celluloid, cut with surgical precision and bearing the telltale striations of careful preparation. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured, holding the transparent fragment to the lamplight. "This is not the random debris of burglary, but the deliberate tool of one who understands the mechanics of impression-taking. See how it has been shaped to capture the resistance patterns of lock tumblers." Dr. Whitfield's examination of the safe mechanism revealed the most disturbing detail of all. "The combination was known, not forced," he announced grimly. "The dial shows no scratches, no signs of manipulation. Whoever opened this safe possessed intimate knowledge of Lady Ashworth's security arrangements." The psychological impact of this revelation rippled through our assembled suspects like a stone cast into still water. Sir Reginald's nervous adjustments of his spectacles became almost compulsive, while Cordelia's carefully maintained composure developed visible hairline cracks. The Harrisons whispered urgently to each other, their faces masks of bewildered terror. Most intriguing was Helena Ashworth's reaction. While the others displayed varying degrees of shock and dismay, she maintained an almost clinical detachment that seemed inappropriate given the circumstances. When Poirot began his characteristic method of indirect questioning, her responses proved particularly revealing. "The preparation of sophisticated burglary tools," he observed conversationally, "requires considerable technical knowledge. One must understand metallurgy, chemistry, the precise properties of various materials. Not every criminal possesses such expertise." Helena's cigarette trembled almost imperceptibly as she responded. Aunt Vivian always insisted that practical knowledge was more valuable than theoretical study. She believed in understanding the applications of science, not merely its principles. Inspector Morrison's systematic search of the remaining suspects proved immediately productive, though not in the manner I expected. In Helena's handbag, concealed beneath powder compact and cigarette case, lay a small glass vial containing a clear liquid that Dr. Whitfield identified as concentrated laurel water. Her explanation that she had discovered it in the conservatory and intended to dispose of it safely rang hollow against the mounting evidence, yet Poirot's manner suggested these discoveries, significant though they appeared, represented only the surface of a deeper deception. His attention focused not on Helena's obvious guilt, but on details that seemed to contradict the apparent solution. The crowbar used to force the door bore no fingerprints, wrapped as it was in chamois leather. The scattered papers, despite their disarray, told a story of methodical rather than desperate searching. "Consider the timeline, mes amis," Poirot observed, his pale eyes sweeping the assembled company. "The theft occurs precisely when we are all gathered together, providing each suspect with a perfect alibi. Yet someone among us possessed not only the combination to the safe, but the technical expertise to stage this elaborate deception. It was Barnes who provided the crucial revelation, summoned by Poirot's gentle inquiry about household security. The butler's precise memory recalled that Helena had requested a detailed tour of Lady Ashworth's arrangements just 3 weeks prior, claiming professional interest in protecting valuable artwork in her London gallery. Her particular attention to the safe's location and the routine of its daily checking had seemed natural at the time. The net appeared to be closing around Helena when Poirot made an observation that changed everything. Examining the safe's interior with his jeweler's loupe, he discovered something that had escaped our earlier attention, a single drop of hardened sealing wax, bearing not the Ashworth family crest, but the distinctive mark of Pemberton Chemical Works. "Most illuminating," he murmured, carefully collecting the evidence. Our thief has left us a signature, though perhaps not intentionally. This wax was used to seal laboratory specimens, a practice that would be familiar to someone with extensive chemical experience. The revelation sent a visible shock through Helena, but her response surprised us all. Instead of denial or further deception, she laughed with bitter irony. "You're quite right, Monsieur Poirot. I did steal chemicals from Pemberton Works. I did forge credentials to obtain my position there. I even prepared the laurel water found in my possession. But I did not murder Aunt Vivian, and I certainly did not steal the winter rose." Her confession poured forth with the desperate relief of a burden too long carried. Lady Ashworth had indeed discovered her niece's criminal activities through private investigators, learning not only about the chemical theft, but about a sophisticated art forgery operation that Helena had been conducting through her London gallery. The Christmas Eve gathering was to witness Helena's confession and voluntary exile to Australia. "She offered me a choice," Helena continued, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Public exposure and prosecution, or a chance to start over honestly with enough money to disappear forever. I chose exile, Monsieur Poirot. I prepared the poison as insurance in case she changed her mind about our arrangement. But someone else used my preparation to murder her before I could confess." Inspector Morrison moved to place Helena under arrest, but Poirot raised a restraining hand. "One moment, Inspector. While Mademoiselle Helena has certainly committed crimes worthy of prosecution, I fear we have not yet reached the heart of this particular mystery." His pale eyes swept the remaining suspects with renewed intensity, and I detected that familiar satisfaction that indicated his little gray cells were approaching a complete solution. The winter rose was never the motive for Lady Ashworth's murder. It was merely the prize that someone hoped to claim once the true obstacle was removed. Our murderer used Helena's preparations and expertise, but they possessed their own knowledge of the household secrets. As if summoned by his words, the sound of breaking glass echoed from the morning room, followed by a woman's scream that cut through the winter silence like a blade through silk. The scream rattled through the corridors of Thornfield Manor, shattering the tense silence that had settled over the house. We rushed toward the morning room, Poirot moving with swift, purposeful steps, Inspector Morrison close behind, his hand already on his service revolver, and the rest of us following in a surge of dread. The door flew open to reveal Cordelia by the bay window, one hand pressed to her mouth, her other trembling as it pointed at the jagged shards of glass and the sharp winter air streaming in. Mrs. Harrison stood near the door, her scream still echoing, while the air was thick with a bitter almond scent, all too familiar by now. On a side table, a porcelain bowl had tipped over, a spirit lamp guttering beneath it, its contents glistening across the mahogany in a sticky trail. Poirot's eyes darted from the broken window to the arrangement on the table, his nose barely twitching as he drew in the faint, toxic vapor. "Hydrogen cyanide, volatilized by heat," he said quietly. "Doctor, open the windows at once. Hastings, please draw the curtains wide." Morrison and Dr. Whitfield moved quickly, creating a cross-draft that swept the poisonous air from the room. Dr. Whitfield, with calm efficiency, doused the lamp and covered the bowl with a damp towel, declaring the air tolerable after a tense minute. "What happened?" Morrison demanded, his voice clipped. Mrs. Harrison, still white and shaking, struggled to explain. "I came from my embroidery. I smelled something awful. Like almonds, but sharper. There was a ribbon tied to the mantel clock. Then the bowl tipped and the window shattered. I thought it was an intruder." Cordelia, shaking, admitted, "I broke the glass. The smell. My head swam. I grabbed the poker and struck the pane for air." Poirot's attention had already fixed on the clock. A modest French piece, now showing signs of tampering. He uncovered a loop of twine, wax securing it, a wire cradle beneath the bowl, and a stub of sealing wax with a factory-cut ring. As he lifted the clock, a taut thread led to the bowl's lip, revealing the device's simplicity and deadly intent. A timed mechanism, set to tip the bowl and release fumes at the hour Lady Ashworth always took tea. This was aimed at habit, not at any one person. Barnes, the butler, confirmed that tea was always taken here at 4. Poirot nodded. The killer exploits routine, using it as a weapon. Morrison examined the window. No footprints outside. The snow is untouched. The glass fell onto the drift, broken from inside to out. This was staged, either to vent the poison or mimic an intruder. Poirot gathered what seemed trivial: a curl of pale wax, a dusting of fine flour on the table's edge, and a tiny flake of brown glass. Flour to thicken and slow evaporation, pharmaceutical glass, wax used for laboratory samples, and we know from Barnes that glycerin and ammonia are missing from the kitchen. Poirot requested everyone's cigarette packets. Helena produced a silver case. Cordelia, apologetic, did not smoke. Mr. Harrison had a cheap, crumpled packet. Dr. Whitfield abstained. Sir Reginald hesitated before handing over a glossy, fashionable packet, its inner foil lining neatly excised, leaving only ragged edges. Matches do not require such precision, Poirot observed, nor do they leave striations like those from lockwork. Morrison's suspicion sharpened. Sir Reginald, where were you after luncheon? Reginald replied, in my room, writing letters. But Cordelia's confirmation came with a hesitation too long for comfort. Upstairs, yes, but I cannot swear to the exact hour. Poirot's eyes measured them both, gentle but unyielding. The truth, madame, is easiest when not strained. Poirot then lifted the bowl, revealing a calling card pressed beneath, its dry impression unmistakable. The rampant lion and motto of Pemberton Chemical Works. Reginald's face went ashen. Trade nonsense, he muttered. Anyone could have... Morrison cut him off. A trade card beneath a murder device in your aunt's morning room is no coincidence. Meanwhile, a commotion drew our attention to the orchid display by the window. There, amidst upturned soil and shattered pot, lay the empty velvet pouch that had once held the winter rose. Poirot examined the scene. The orchid, Lady Ashworth's prized phalaenopsis, shows no distress despite the pot's breakage. The roots are intact and recently watered. This was staged, not the result of panic. The thief understands both the diamond's value and the significance of this flower to Lady Ashworth. This is a calculated violation of trust, designed to mislead. Poirot's gaze swept the assembled company. Every clue, chemical, botanical, psychological, has been chosen to frame or distract, not to reveal. The murderer has manipulated evidence and suspicion, using both Helena's expertise and Reginald's desperation to mask their own hand. But each deception leaves its own mark. He straightened, calm but commanding. Inspector, I will require a few minutes alone in the study. The murderer, now desperate, will soon be forced into their final, fatal error. We are very close. Let us prepare for the last act. As the household was gathered and the doors secured, I sensed the tightening net. Poirot's mind, always several moves ahead, was springing the ultimate trap. The next revelation would be decisive, for the murderer's web of misdirection was about to collapse, and the truth at the heart of the winter rose would finally be unmasked. Poirot's request for solitude in the study was granted with visible reluctance by Inspector Morrison, but the detective's quiet authority brooked no argument. As the door closed behind him, I observed our remaining suspects with heightened awareness, noting how the afternoon's revelations had stripped away their social masks to reveal the raw anxiety beneath. Dr. Whitfield had positioned himself near the fireplace, his medical bag clutched with unusual tightness. His customary professional composure showed hairline fractures, and when he thought himself unobserved, his hands trembled with barely perceptible tremors. The discovery of the morning room device had affected him more profoundly than his calm exterior suggested, and I began to understand why. Sir Reginald continued his restless pacing, his nervous energy finally finding physical expression through constant adjustment of his spectacles. The revelation about the calling card had left him visibly shaken, yet there was something in his manner that suggested bewilderment rather than guilt. Cordelia maintained her position on the settee, but her elegant facade bore the strain of accumulated shocks. The Harrisons huddled together near the door, their whispered conversations growing more urgent with each passing minute. Helena, now under informal arrest, sat apart from the others with the resignation of one whose secrets had been thoroughly exposed. Yet even in her defeat, I detected not the despair of a murderer caught, but the frustrated anger of someone who had been outmaneuvered by a superior opponent. When Poirot emerged from the study after 20 minutes, he carried with him a leather portfolio that I recognized as Lady Ashworth's private correspondence file. His pale eyes held that particular intensity that indicated his investigation had reached its crucial phase, and his manner suggested complete satisfaction with his discoveries. "Mes amis," he began, his voice carrying gentle authority that commanded immediate attention, "I have spent these minutes reviewing Lady Ashworth's private papers, and I find myself compelled to share certain revelations that cast our entire investigation in a dramatically new light." He opened the portfolio with ceremonial care, extracting several documents bearing the distinctive letterheads of various London medical institutions. Lady Ashworth, it appears, had been conducting her own investigation into certain irregularities that had come to her attention over the past year. These letters, dated over recent months, detail her growing concerns about the medical treatment of several elderly patients in this district. Dr. Whitfield's face had gone quite pale, but he maintained his professional composure as Poirot continued with inexorable logic. It seems that Lady Ashworth had discovered a disturbing pattern of premature deaths among her contemporaries. Mrs. Pemberton last spring, old Colonel Morrison in the autumn, the unfortunate Mrs. Blackthorne just 6 weeks ago. Each death was preceded by a period of declining health under the care of the same physician, and each involved symptoms that Lady Ashworth's botanical expertise allowed her to recognize as consistent with chronic plant poisoning. The implications struck the assembled company like a physical blow. Mrs. Harrison gasped audibly, while Sir Reginald's pacing ceased abruptly. The true scope of the crimes was becoming horrifyingly clear. "The winter rose," Poirot observed quietly, "was never the primary motive for Lady Ashworth's murder. It was merely a convenient prize that someone hoped to claim once the true obstacle to their continued activities was removed. Our murderer killed not for immediate gain, but to prevent exposure of a far more extensive criminal enterprise." Dr. Whitfield's medical bag had begun to tremble in his grip, and when Inspector Morrison moved to examine its contents, the brass clasps opened to reveal not only the usual medical implements, but several small glass vials containing clear liquids, and most damningly, a leather-bound notebook filled with precise handwriting, documenting dosages, symptoms, and the progression of various ailments. "The good doctor," Poirot continued with gentle inexorability, "has been conducting his own botanical experiments for considerable time. His victims were chosen with methodical care. Elderly patients with substantial estates, limited family connections, and complete trust in their family physician. The symptoms he induced mimicked natural aging and decline, allowing him to collect substantial fees while positioning himself as the medical authority in cases where inheritance questions might arise." The method of Lady Ashworth's murder became clear as Poirot explained the doctor's intimate knowledge of household routines, his legitimate access to the conservatory through medical visits, and his familiarity with Lady Ashworth's evening habits. Helena's prepared laurel water had merely provided convenient cover, while the elaborate staging of evidence against various suspects had been designed to obscure his own involvement. Each piece of planted evidence served a dual purpose, Poirot explained. The laurel leaves in Monsieur Blackwood's case suggested botanical knowledge while pointing away from medical expertise. The calling card and chemical evidence were designed to implicate Sir Reginald's desperation while obscuring the true scientific precision involved. Even the staged theft of the winter rose was calculated to suggest greed as the primary motive rather than the prevention of exposure. Dr. Whitfield's confession, when it came, was delivered with the clinical detachment that had characterized his decades of careful deception. Lady Ashworth's knowledge made her uniquely dangerous, he admitted quietly. She understood plant chemistry better than most trained physicians. When she began asking questions about the pattern of deaths, connecting symptoms to deliberate poisoning, I knew exposure was inevitable, unless she was silenced. As Inspector Morrison placed the handcuffs around Dr. Whitfield's wrists, the full horror of his crimes settled over us. For years, he had used his position of trust to systematically murder his elderly patients, accumulating wealth while maintaining the facade of devoted medical service. Lady Ashworth's botanical expertise had made her the one person capable of recognizing his methods, sealing her fate. The psychological game Poirot had mentioned was now complete. By allowing the doctor to believe his misdirection had succeeded, by permitting him to plant evidence against others, Poirot had given him enough rope to hang himself thoroughly. The murderer's desperate attempts to confuse the investigation had instead provided a clear trail leading directly back to his own door. As the winter dusk deepened outside Thornfield Manor's windows, justice had finally been served, though the human cost of Dr. Whitfield's betrayal would haunt this community for years to come. The silence that followed Dr. Whitfield's arrest was profound and terrible, broken only by the soft whisper of snow against the frosted windows. Inspector Morrison's men led the doctor away with professional efficiency, but his confession had left wounds in the assembled company that would not heal quickly. The realization that their trusted family physician had systematically murdered elderly patients while maintaining a facade of devoted care struck at the very foundations of their social order. Yet as I observed Poirot standing by the fireplace, his pale eyes reflecting the dancing flames, I detected in his manner a satisfaction that suggested his investigation was not quite complete. There remained, I sensed, one final revelation that would bring this complex affair to its proper conclusion. "There is still the matter of the winter rose," he announced quietly, his gaze settling on the crystal vase of winter roses that had presided over Lady Ashworth's final evening. "You see, mes amis, our murderer was correct in believing the diamond had been moved from the safe, but he fundamentally misunderstood Lady Ashworth's psychology. With characteristic precision, Poirot approached the vase and turned it carefully in the lamplight. Observe the faint meniscus around the waterline. Glycerin, not water, to preserve the blooms. But notice also this hairline seam encircling the base. Using gentle heat from a spirit lamp and a thin blade, he loosened a pale rim of wax that had sealed the joint. The weighted base came free in his hands, revealing a small, lead-lined cavity within. Nestled inside, cold and terrible in its beauty, lay the winter rose. The room seemed to breathe as one. In the lamplight, the legendary diamond was like compacted frost, blue-white and deep as winter ice. The elegance of Lady Ashworth's hiding place struck us all simultaneously. She had concealed her most precious possession within the arrangement that bore its name, trusting that no thief would dare disturb her sacred botanical display. Lady Ashworth left herself a private note in her botanical commonplace book, Poirot explained, carefully returning the gem to its hiding place. Helleborus niger under glass. Shelter the winter rose. It was both a mnemonic and an instruction. She anticipated theft, but she understood that her murderer would seek the obvious places first. Barnes, recovering his composure, confirmed that he had refreshed the vase arrangement just 2 days prior under Lady Ashworth's direct supervision, never knowing its true cargo. The butler's face showed a mixture of wonder and profound sadness at his mistress's final, clever deception. Now, as to the method of murder, Poirot continued, his voice taking on that familiar instructional tone. It was elegantly simple, requiring only intimate knowledge of household routines and the supreme confidence that comes with decades of medical authority. When Barnes departed to arrange coffee for Mrs. Harrison, Lady Ashworth followed her invariable habit of pouring her evening kummel. In that crucial interval, Dr. Whitfield, the concerned physician, the man to whom all defer in medical matters, had merely to pass the sideboard and introduce 2 drops from a prepared vial into her specific glass. The psychological elements of the crime became clear as Poirot explained how the doctor had exploited every aspect of his position. He controlled our response from the moment Lady Ashworth collapsed, declaring death, guiding our examination of the scene, even suggesting the botanical nature of the poison. Later, he prepared the laurel paste in the conservatory, planted evidence in Monsieur Blackwood's case, and created the elaborate deceptions designed to frame each of you in turn. Helena, still bearing the weight of her own confessions, looked up with something approaching gratitude. You knew from the beginning that I hadn't killed her. Your crimes, mademoiselle, were those of desperation and misguided ambition, Poirot replied gently. But murder of this systematic nature requires a different psychology entirely. The ability to destroy trust while maintaining its appearance. You lacked the coldness necessary for such sustained deception. The scope of Dr. Whitfield's criminal enterprise became horrifyingly clear as Barnes, at Poirot's request, recounted the doctor's recent house calls. No fewer than 7 elderly patients in the district had died over the past 2 years, each following a period of declining health under his care. Lady Ashworth's botanical expertise had made her uniquely dangerous, capable of recognizing the symptoms of chronic plant poisoning that others dismissed as natural aging. The most chilling aspect of this affair, Poirot reflected, accepting a brandy from Barnes's steady hand, lies not in the murders themselves, but in the systematic abuse of trust that made them possible. Dr. Whitfield understood that his victims would never question medical advice, never suspect that their trusted physician was slowly poisoning them under the guise of treatment. As for the fates of our remaining suspects, Poirot addressed each with characteristic precision. Sir Reginald and Cordelia, though cleared of murder, faced the consequences of their attempted burglary, but the recovery of funds embezzled by Dr. Whitfield offered hope for a less desperate future. Helena would answer for her forgeries and deceptions, but with the possibility of genuine redemption. The Harrisons, though still poor, were at least safe from the predator who had stalked their community. The psychological aftermath would, I knew, haunt the survivors for years. The comfortable certainties of rural society had been shattered, replaced by the knowledge that evil could wear a familiar face and speak with a trusted voice. Yet there was also the satisfaction that comes from seeing justice finally served. As we prepared for our departure the following morning, the storm having passed to leave Thornfield Manor buried under pristine snow, Poirot gathered his coat and gloves with characteristic precision. The winter rose had been secured in a traveling safe for immediate deposit at the bank, its legendary beauty forever shadowed by the crimes it had witnessed. Botanical poisons, mon ami, Poirot observed as our sleigh prepared to depart, are the favorite weapons of those who mistake subtlety for wisdom. They require patience, knowledge, but above all, they require the vanity to think oneself invisible. That vanity is always the crack through which the light enters. He paused, watching as the morning sun struck the high windows of Thornfield Manor, causing the old house to blaze momentarily in the clear winter air. Remember this also, Hastings. Habit is the most ruthless of accomplices. It will betray the innocent and deliver the guilty into the very snare they set. The winter rose endures. It is the hearts of men that fail. As we departed down the long drive, I reflected on the peculiar justice of Lady Ashworth's final stratagem. In death, she had protected her treasure more effectively than any safe or vault, hiding it within the beauty she had cultivated in life. The winter roses, would bloom again, but the memory of their deadly secret would forever remind the survivors that even the most beautiful arrangements can conceal the darkest truths. The affair at Thornfield Manor was closed, but its lessons would endure as long as human nature remained capable of both breathtaking beauty and unspeakable betrayal. The pale winter light that filtered through Thornfield Manor's frost-covered windows seemed to herald not just a new day, but the final resolution of our extraordinary case. The snow had ceased during the night, leaving the Yorkshire landscape transformed into a pristine tableau of white silence, as if nature itself sought to draw a clean veil over the dark deeds that had been exposed within these ancient walls. Poirot stood by the morning-room window, his pale eyes contemplating the crystal vase that had once held both Lady Ashworth's beloved winter roses and her most precious secret. His fingers drummed a precise rhythm against the windowsill, a sure sign that his remarkable mind was organizing the final threads of the investigation into those neat categories that would allow him to file the case away with characteristic satisfaction. "The psychology of Dr. Whitfield fascinates me still, mon ami," he said without turning, displaying that uncanny ability to sense my approach. "How does a man sworn to preserve life become so systematic a destroyer of it? The answer lies not in a single moment of corruption, but in the gradual erosion of conscience that comes from wielding absolute authority over the vulnerable." His analysis proved as penetrating as ever. Dr. Whitfield had begun his criminal career not with murder, but with small betrayals of trust, altered prescriptions to prolong profitable treatments, minor thefts from elderly patients, the gradual realization that his medical authority rendered him virtually above suspicion. Each transgression had made the next easier, until the taking of life itself seemed merely another tool in his arsenal of systematic deception. 3 weeks after our return to London, the full scope of the doctor's crimes became public knowledge through his trial at the Old Bailey. The prosecution, aided by Poirot's meticulous documentation, revealed a pattern of murder spanning nearly 3 years. 11 elderly patients had died under his care, each following a period of mysterious decline that had enriched the doctor while devastating their families. The judge's final words, that Dr. Whitfield had perverted the sacred trust of healing into an instrument of the death, seemed to capture the particular horror of his betrayal. The fates of our other suspects proved more merciful than they had dared hope. Helena Ashworth's cooperation with the investigation, combined with evidence of her systematic manipulation by Dr. Whitfield, resulted in a reduced sentence of 2 years' imprisonment. She departed for Australia upon her release, carrying with her a small inheritance from Lady Ashworth's estate and, more importantly, a genuine opportunity for redemption through honest artistic endeavor. Sir Reginald and Cordelia's circumstances improved dramatically when the investigation revealed Dr. Whitfield's systematic embezzlement from the Ashworth estate through fraudulent medical bills. The recovery of these funds, combined with their inheritance of Thornfield Manor itself, provided them with the financial stability that had long eluded them. Sir Reginald's gambling debts were settled, and he threw himself into the estate's restoration with an energy that suggested genuine reformation. The Harrisons, though still of modest means, found themselves beneficiaries of Lady Ashworth's final charitable gesture, a small but adequate annual income that would ensure their dignity in old age. More importantly, they were safe from the predator who had stalked their community with such calculated malevolence. The Winter Rose itself was donated to the British Museum, where it now resides in a specially constructed display that tells the story of Lady Ashworth's final, brilliant deception. Visitors often comment on the poetic justice of her hiding place. The legendary diamond concealed within the arrangement that bore its name, protected by beauty even in death. As we prepared for our departure, the morning sun struck the high windows of Thornfield Manor, causing the old house to blaze momentarily in the clear winter air. Near the entrance, A single winter rose still bloomed defiantly, its pale petals dusted with fresh snow, a living testament to the resilience of beauty in the face of evil. "You see, Hastings," Poirot observed, adjusting his scarf with characteristic precision. "Lady Ashworth understood that true value lies not in obvious display, but in hidden depths. She concealed her diamond not in a vault, but within the essence of her passion, knowing that the obvious is often the most overlooked." He paused, his gaze taking in the snow-covered grounds one final time. The most disturbing aspect of this case was not the murders themselves, but the systematic destruction of trust that made them possible. Dr. Whitfield understood that his victims would never question medical authority, never suspect that their healer had become their destroyer. Yet there is also hope in Lady Ashworth's final stratagem. Even in death, she protected what she valued most, using knowledge and beauty to outwit those who would destroy it. As our sleigh prepared to depart down the long drive, Poirot settled into his seat with evident satisfaction. "Order, mon ami. It is everything. Even in the chaos of murder, there is an underlying pattern, a logical progression. One has only to engage the little gray cells, and the truth will reveal itself like a winter rose pushing through the snow." The affair of the winter rose had concluded, but its lessons would endure, that evil might wear the most trusted face, that beauty and danger are forever entwined, and that only through the patient application of reason can the darkest secrets finally be brought to light. The winter roses would bloom again at Thornfield Manor, and perhaps that was the most fitting memorial to a woman who understood that true beauty lies not in possession, but in preservation.